reisman.com.
In Perek Zayin, we had learned Pasik Yutes Chaf and Chaf Aleph, which deal with the downfall of Shimshon at the hands of Delilah. I want to go back to the Torah Shabbal Peh on these psukim, back in Pasik Yutes, where the Pasik said, "V'tera Delilah ki higidla es kol libai." Shimshon lied 3 times. The 4th time, Delilah knew that he was telling the truth. How so? So the Gemara in Saita and Avtesa Beis asks, "Menayada, how did Delilah know that this time he's telling the truth?" One teretz, the Gemara says, is Nikarim Divrei Emes. Somehow truth is nicker. But the Gemara's second teretz, Abaya Amar, Yada ba'oisei tzadik she'enei mapik shem shemayim levatala. She knew that he would not say God's name if it wasn't true. He would not say Hashem's name levatala. Where did he say Hashem's name? He said to her, Nizir Elikim Anoichi. He said to her that I'm a Nizir Elikim. Elikim is God's name. Now it's very obvious that he didn't say Elikim with a K sound like I just said it, but that in talking to Delilah, he said it with the Hey sound. And therefore she knew he would not say the Shem Shemayim Levatala. This is the Gemara explaining these psukim. The Chinuch HaMitzvah Taflam, it says, Boyu Rei Kama Hayu Nisarim B'zeh. Look at how careful they were in not saying Shem Shemayim Levatala. Shedalila hikira shehigla es kalibai baskire Elokim b'sech devarav. She knew, even under these circumstances, he would not say Hashem's name for nothing. Okay, so it's a limud and it's a pshat. But this leads us to really a broader question, a broader chakira, that has to do with the way Jews spoke. Now, I'm not talking about davening or learning. The way Jews spoke to each other, men to their wives, wives to their husbands, men to their friends. When you meet a friend in the street and you say to him, Baruch Hashem, I got a job. The word Hashem is not really God's name. Would it be the right thing to say Baruch and say the Shem Adnus, I got a job? Or is it a proper behavior to say Baruch Hashem? Well, the question is how the Gedolei Olam in the time of Tanakh behaved. There's a raya from Chumash, from Nevi'im, and from Suvim that they did say the Shem Hashem when they spoke to each other. That in the common speech between people, the Shem Hashem was used. The raya from Chumash is from Parshas Toldos. When Yitzchak says, Gerona va'amushcha b'ni, he says, Yaakov, are you really Yaakov? Let me tap you, let me feel you. So Rashi says, Ein derech Esav liyos shem shemayim shogar b'piv. Yaakov just said, Ki hikra Hashem alakecha lefanai. I have a meal for you because HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused me to quickly find an animal for you to shecht and cook. And Yitzchak said, what? Esav doesn't use God's name. Must be that this is Yaakov, Gerona va'amushcha b'ni. So it's a raya that they did say Hashem's name. Now you'll say, hold on, that's not a raya. What kind of raya is that? Maybe Yaakov didn't say Hashem's name, he just said Hashem. Maybe he used the words the way we use it and said, Ki hikra Hashem Elokecha, with a K sound. Lefanai. That would fit. And Yitzchak said, well, Esav doesn't talk that way. But it's not true. Because the Ramban and the Maral ask on Rashi that Esav was trying to fool Yitzchak all the time. Why wouldn't he use the Shem Hashem in order to fool Yitzchak? So what's Rashi saying? Esav doesn't talk this way. The Ramban and the Maral answer in slightly different ways, but essentially the same idea. That Yaakov sat in the Beis Medrash all day. Shem Shamayim Shogro Bepiv. He said the Shem Hashem. Esav was out hunting. He was in places that were not so clean. And therefore, he told Yitzchak, he doesn't say the Shem Hashem, because if he gets used to expressing God's name, he'll do it out in the field, by the carcass of a dead animal, by other things that are not clean. And therefore, Esav's behavior was not to say the Shem Hashem. Now, obviously, to say Hashem, or Elikecha with a K sound, is not an Aveira in a Makam HaTinoifis, in a place that's not clean. The Maral and the Ramban understand Rashi and understand these psukim that they said the Shem Hashem Mamish. And that's the way they spoke. That's the Raya from Chumash. The Raya from Navi is here from the fact that in speaking to his wife, Shimshon said, Nizir Elikim Alechi. He didn't say Elikim with a kuf, he said it with a hey. As the Gemara says, he would not say Shem Shemayim Levatolo. And a raya from Ksuvim is from Rus, Perik Beis Pasuk Dalit. Vayomer LaKaitzrim, Boaz appears and says to the workers, Hashem Imachem. Hashem is with you. Vayomer Lo Yivarechecha Hashem. And they said Yivarechecha Hashem. And the Gemara says in Brachas Nandal, Hiskinu, Shiehei Shoyel B'Sholem Chaveiroi B'Shem. The takana was to say God's name when you say hello to somebody. And therefore, Baya said, Hashem Imachem. He didn't say Hashem, H-A-S-H-E-M. He said Hashem, the Shem Adnus, Imachem. They responded, Yivarechecha Hashem, with God's name. So it's very clear that in everyday speaking, the practice was to say God's name, and it's not levatala, as long as you're telling the truth. In a place that's clean, someone says, how do you feel? Say, Baruch Hashem, fine. You say God's name. The Ikar HaHalacha and the practice of earlier generations was that that's mutter. The question is, why are we machmir? Why are we, at least in most circles of Klal Yisrael, very careful? Even when you hear recordings of songs that Menagdim sing, we sing, Ona Hashem, Ki Ani Avdecha. We don't say God's name. Now, there are some circles in Klal Yisrael, among Sfaradim, where they say Hashem's name, when they say, sing Ona Hashem, Ki Ani Avdecha, even on recordings. It would seem that technically there's nothing wrong. Most of Klal Yisrael says Hashem. Why? The Chida, quoted in the Sharei Tshuva, Siman Reish Tezvav Sivkat and Dalet, says that it's a minig Rabbanan Kashishoy, the minig of the elder Chachamim, that we be extra careful. We be careful in saying Hashem's name. We'll be talking and saying Hashem's name all the time. We'll do it improperly. It's interesting that Rabbi Yaakov in the Emes Yaakov on Parshas Toldai says this in the following lashon. Listen to this: Kulanu b'madregosai shel Esav le'inyan zeh. We're all like Esav, or he says le'inyan zeh. We're not all like Esav, but in this regard, Eilanu ha'pachad v'hayira karoi k'dei lahaskir shem shemayim kahagen. Just like the Maral and the Ramban explained that Esav limited saying Shem Hashem, we too limited. But there's something to be understood, that saying Hashem's name, as was apparently common, at least among Gedolei Yisrael in the generations of Tanakh, and who knows for how many generations thereafter, it's not really about the name Hashem as opposed to the kinoi Hashem. It's not all about Elikim with a K and Elikim with a Hey. What it really is about is saying Hashem's name and thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Saying Hashem's name and having a chashivas for it, having meaning in it. Saying Baruch Hashem and meaning it. How do you feel, Baruch Hashem? During times where it's not so simple that everyone is well, you say Baruch Hashem differently. Every day, Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem doesn't mean anything. How do you find? Doesn't mean much. Certain Ema and Yira, there's a certain goal in having lives that are based around talking about Hashem, thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and doing it meaningfully. Today, I'd like to share with you a piece of history about a Gadol B'Yisrael. A Gadol B'Yisrael who stood out, as we shall see, in his recognition of the Borei Olam in everything that he did. I want to talk to you about the Ran. The Ran, as you should know, is one of the Rishonim. Gedolei HaRishonim. We can't measure greatness of Rishonim, but perhaps among our 10 greatest teachers, those whose Svarim are used widely among the Rishonim, the Ran is up there as one of them. I don't know of any biography of the Ran, but we do know a little bit about his greatness and his life, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. The Ran was a Sephardic Gadol. I've mentioned in the past, much to the surprise of many of the Talmidim in Yeshiva, that virtually all the Rishonim were Sephardim. Virtually all, besides Rashi and Tosfos, but the Rambam and the Rif and the Beis Chananel and the Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritva and the Ra'ah and the Ran and the Mukhi Yosef, the ones whose Torah we learn were virtually all Rishai, all Sephardim. The Rosh was, of course, from Ashkenaz. He moved to Sfarad in the middle of his life. The Ran was one of the Gedolei Sfarad. He lived in the 14th century. He was born in the year 1290, as is clear from his writings, and lived through much of the 14th century. He was the Gadol Hadar in his generation. The Ramban is Rabbeinu Nissim ben Reuven. Someone who learns the Mukhi Yosef will see he quotes Ran Bar, Reish Nun Beis Reish, Rabbeinu Nissim ben Reuven. Their name was used to draw a distinction between him and Rabbeinu Nissim, the Talmud of the Ramban. We have a pirish on the side of the page in Brachos, in the standard Gemara, which is Rabbeinu Nissim Gain, to make a distinction between him and our Ran. The name Ran Bar was used, but over the generations he's become known as the Ran. The Tshuvas Harivash, Tshuva Shin Ayin Hey, he writes about the Ran, Gadol Hadarhu, Kulanu Klapov Keklipas Hashum. He's the Gadol Hadar. We, compared to him, are like the peel of a garlic. This is the Ran. The Ran wrote, as you know, a pirish on the Masechtas of Shas, a pirish on the Rif. We have it in perhaps 14 or 15 Masechtas printed in our Shasen. In addition, the Chidushei Haran was discovered just a little over 100 years ago. We have Chidushei Haran on other Masechtas. We also have from the Ran the Droshes Haran. And of all his writings, the most beloved is the Pirush Haran on the Masechta Nedarim, which is printed in the standard Gemara on the side of the page. The Ran on Nedarim is the most extraordinary sefer among Rishonim. Rav Pam used to say, I think he was quoting Rav Baruch Ber, about the sweetness of the Ran on Nedarim. He said, if you have a Ran on Nedarim, who needs Olam Haba? You have Olam Haba right here. The Ran rescued Masechtas Nedarim. Masechtas Nedarim, unknown to many, was not learned. It was skipped for a few hundred years in the Seder of the Masechtas. If you take a Ran, the standard prints of the Ran, go to the back of the Masechta, there's a paragraph which says the Ga'inim said not to learn the Masechta because in their generation people were making Nedarim, taking oaths for no good reason, relying that they could just be Matir Neder. And therefore, the Rishonim cut out the learning of the Ran. That's why we don't have Rashi on the Ran. We don't have a standard Tosfos, so most Mefarshim on the Ran. The Ran, we could say, rescued Masechtas Nedarim, and nobody learns Nedarim without the Ran. This is the Ran, the Gadol Hadar. He set up extraordinary Talmidim. We know a few of them because they write that he was their Rebbe. The Muki Yosef, you know that the Ran is around the Rif. In Masechtas where there is no Ran, we have the Muki Yosef as a Pirish in the Rif in his place, and virtually every Masechta. Muki Yosef was his Talmud and continued in his Avodah. The Rivash was one of the Gedolei Hadar, who was a Talmud of the Ran. Rabbi Yosef Albo, who wrote the Sefer Ikrim, not well known today. I remember as a Bacher discovering Rabbi Yosef Albo's Sefer Ikrim, I was enthralled by it. Wherever I went, I used to take it with me. My Sefer Ikrim is underlined with parts that I reviewed over and over. Maimer Dalet, especially Maimer Dalet in the Sefer Ikrim, the Afur Mamorim, talks about the philosophical underpinnings of Yiddishkeit in a beautiful way. Rabbi Yosef Albo. The Ralbag, we know the Ralbag is a Mefarish on much of Tanakh. The Ralbag was a Gadol Hadar. He too wrote Svarim on the Hashkafas HaYehudim. The Gos Ashri, very interesting. The Rosh has printed in its column the Hagos Ashri, the notes called Hagos Ashri. It's historically a Dovapel, an amazing thing. They don't pick up on it. The Hagos Ashri is not a Pirish on the Rosh. The Ran is a Pirish on the Rif. It's printed together. Hagos Ashri is not a Pirish on the Rosh at all. It's a freestanding Sefer, which at some time in history the printer inserted whatever the Hagos Ashri brings into the Rosh in places where it has a connection to the Gemara. And therefore we have the Hagos Ashri, the Hagos that are accompanying the Rosh. Also a Talmud of the Ran. Magid Mishnah, whose Pirish is alongside the Rambam, was a Talmud of the Ran. The Maram Chalva, who's best known for his Pirish on Pesachim, was another one of the Talmidei Haran. These are Talmidim that lit up the Jewish world for the generation past the life of the Ran. The Ran taught, he had a yeshiva. The Ran paskind. We don't have many of his tshuvas, but we know he was the Pesach of the generation, quoted by others after him. And the Ran led Spanish Jewry towards the end of its golden age. In the days of the Ran, there was a tremendous philosophical battle. Now you have to understand, historically, the Rambam had come along much earlier in the 12th century and written philosophical svarim. Jews across most of Europe and even parts of Sfarad did not learn the Rambam's philosophical svarim based on the advice of great people, the Rashba, Rabbeinu Yaina, who discouraged the learning of Meir Devuchim or other things the Rambam wrote that dealt with the depth of philosophical thought, which is really not for everybody. And that became the hashkafa, the thought of much of the Jewish people. Later, when the Christians reconquered Spain and many of the other countries that the Muslims had conquered centuries earlier, they came with philosophical arguments against the Jews. And suddenly the Ran found himself in a generation where he had to talk about the philosophical thoughts of Yiddishkeit without going in the path of the Rambam, the wide open path, but in a more logical and a more based on psukim type of approach. And the Ran did that. The Droshos Haran were written to explain the philosophical underpinnings of Yiddishkeit. They're not droshes like you find the Droshos Sefer on Chumash. The Droshos Haran, which talk about what Yiddishkeit is about. His Talmidim, Rabbi Yosef Albo, wrote the Sefer Ikrim, the Ralbag, who wrote many Svarim that have to do with the philosophy of Yiddishkeit. These Svarim were written because of a great battle that took place during his time. And so I described to you the life of Aram. We get a picture of a Gadol B'Yisrael sitting in a Beis Medrash, leading his people, a glorious time, a romanticized image of a Gadol B'Yisrael with all of Klal Yisrael coming to learn from him. A story definitely of an exceptional person in an uplifting life. There's another interesting point. There's a Sefer Torah Shel Haran. His Talmidim write that he wrote a Sefer Torah. And what's interesting is that Sefer Torah is still around. We find it in 1930 in Tiberia. Today it's in Eretz Yisrael. The Sefer Torah of the Ran has a metal ornament attached which says the following. Sefer Torah HaKadosh HaZeh Kosafti La'atzmi U'L'Schusi. This Sefer Torah I wrote myself in my honor, as a schus for me rather. Nissim ben Avi Adoidi Merenu Harav Ruvain gerona of gerona. Nasati al Tanai bebeis hakneses Kilas Yaakov, and I've donated it on a condition, loaned it to the shul Kilas Yaakov Bekahal Kadisha Barcelona in the shul. B'chaydish Sivan Hamu'ula Shnas Hey Alaf and Tzadik Vav Liyitzira in 1336. So we have the Sefer Torah of the Ran donated to a shul. Imagine today we donate Sefer Torah to shuls. Centuries later, the Kila Kadisha, Kilas Yaakov de Barcelona is not known. The Sefer Torah still exists. What's one of the most fascinating things about this Sefer Torah is that the letter Kuf, which is normally sort of a reish with a detached regel with a foot that goes below the line, that Sefer Torah has every Kuf with the regel touching the roof. In other words, there is no space. A hay has a space between the regel and the roof and the top. The Kuf has it as well. In the Sefer Torah Ran, every regel of the Kuf touches the Gag. Shulchan Aruch in Ilchis Tefillin in Arachaim Siman Lamed Beis, if Yud Ches and Chafei, says it's possible. Ilchis Gittin in Even Ezer Kuf Chafei Sif Tezayin. Yet the Ran wrote it this way. The Shuvas HaTashpatz. Tashpatz calls the Ran Rabbi Shel Moiri. Tashpatz was a Talmud of the Rivash, a Talmud of the Ran. He was asked whether a regel touching a roof of a kuf is kosher or possible b'di'evet in a Sefer Torah. And he writes that the Sefer Torah of the Ran has it touching the kuf. And someone asked the Ran, how could that be? And he answered in some mysterious way, hard to know what the Ran meant. Now you'll say, well, the Ran holds it's kosher. We have the Ran on Shabbos Daf Kuf Dalet that he writes, and I quote, and that's the sugya of the Tzuras HaIsyais in Masechta Shabbos. Mikan shetzarich laharchik haregel min hagag. That the letter of the kuf has to be distanced from the roof, and they should not touch. So it's a little mysterious as to why the Sefer Torah is this way. I guess it adds a touch of mystery to this beautiful picture that we have of the Ran. The Ran was an extraordinary leader of Klal Yisrael, a majestic life. We picture a royal, majestic life. Manig Yisrael. Those of us who could think centuries later, having seen Gedolei Yisrael, of our own generation, Ramesha leading Klal Yisrael, Rabbi Yashav leading Klal Yisrael, Yibad L'chaim, L'chaim Kanievsky leading Klal Yisrael, we have pictures of what a Gadol is, and we multiply it many times over to talk about the Ran. If I stopped here, we'd have a very positive picture of the life of the Ran, of what he did, and we would be totally off. Everything I've told you is true to the best of my knowledge. Everything I told you has a source, but it's not the whole picture of the Ran. I want to tell you a little more about the Ran. The Ran suffered greatly. The Ran lived in a generation that suffered greatly. We don't know all the details of his life, but from Svarim that remain, we know a little. As I mentioned, the Ran led a philosophical debate against the Christians of his time, and he did so very well. The Christians had reconquered Spain from the Muslims, or most of Spain, in the 13th century. And in the 14th century, with the beginnings of the Inquisition, what would ultimately lead 100, 150 years later to the expulsion from Spain. His defense was good, but led to harsh persecution. We know from the Tshuvas HaRivash, as I said, the Rivash was a Talmud, and in Tshuvas Shin Ayin Vav he mentions how the Ran, along with the Rivash and 4 other Talmidim, were jailed by the Spanish king for 5 months. Now, I have to tell you what it means to be in a Spanish jail for 5 months. It's nothing like the United States. Whenever I talk about jail, I remember back in the 80s, in Reisman's bakery, my father had a foreman who had come from Russia. A Russian Yid, Mordcha, we called him. And the way it worked in the bakery was that an order is called in, it's filled into a slip of paper, and it's given to the foreman to make sure that it's produced. So, my father, Olav Shalom, came to this Mordcha, Olav Shalom, with a paper for, 50 dozen chocolate danishes. It said Connecticut State Penitentiary had ordered 50 dozen kosher danishes. And Mordcha says, "Was ist das penitentiary?" So my father said, "That's the jail." So he looked at him incredulously. He said, "In jail? Get men danishes?" He didn't understand. I assure you, in the Ran's jail, they did not give danishes. The Ran suffered in this jail for 5 months. Rivash writes, "Yotzonu nikiyim," and historians question whether they went out innocent or they went out nikiyim in the chasav. Some translate it to mean that they went out penniless, their money was taken. We don't know what the Rivash meant, and under what pressure he was to write things a certain way. Why was he jailed? The Rivash doesn't say. In the introduction to the Drosha Saran from Mechon Sha'ar Yerushalayim, they bring that there were circumstances under which there was a billboard, there was an accusation against the Jewish community in Spain that they had desecrated certain Christian holy objects. And the king at the time, I believe it was a King John, had come and locked all of the Yidden into their shuls without food or water for an extended period as part of his persecution, to try to get someone to confess to the crime. It's likely that it was during that time period that the Ran was jailed. We start to see a very different kufa in the life of the Ran. The Ran leading Klal Yisrael during times of persecution from the government, not just from hoodlums around, but from the official government. You have to defend Yiddishkeit philosophically and not do it too well. You get into trouble. The Ran's life was not so easy. But that's only half the story. There's another piece. The 14th century was a terribly difficult century. During this century, there was what is known as the Black Death or the Black Plague that swamped Europe from 1347 and continued for many, many years. Primarily from 1347 to 1351, there was a disease. Today, scientists believe it was the bubonic plague, a plague of a disease that's easily spread from person to person. This was in a generation that knew nothing about germs, knew nothing about viruses. People were extremely superstitious. People thought the wells had been poisoned and accused the Jews of having done it. Let me tell you what a Maigefa it was. It's estimated that between a third and half of all human beings in Europe died during those 4 years. Among the Jewish population, it was more like 20%, primarily because Jews practice good hygiene. And we bury our dead immediately. Dead bodies help spread this disease. It was an absolutely awful time for the entire world, and especially for Yidden. I'd like to read to you from the Drosha Saran, because in Drosha Yud, the Ran writes a little bit about his experience during this time. Terrible. I'm quoting towards the end of Drusha Asiri, and lest you think that this is a Drosha Sefer with millions of droshas, it's not so. The entire Drosha Sefer has 12 or 13 droshas, and this is one. Anachnu re'inu musar elekeinu zeh yud gimel shana. We have seen HaKadosh Baruch Hu's decree now for 13 years. Asher nishtanu sidrei bereshis. The whole world changed. Ki yarad ra me'es Hashem l'roiv yoshvei ha'olam. Terrible decree has come from God to most of humanity. V'chalu behem chaloi mishunim. And they've been sick with awful diseases. We can't describe it as normal nature of the world. It never happened before. Everyone, any thinking human being will agree it's the finger of God. Normal illnesses that happen to people are natural. When something happens that's so unusual, so different, they can never be explained as nature. V'Oila Re'inu Be'eineinu, and we see with our eyes. Shenepach ha'olam b'shana achas, the world changed in 1 year. Yoisem ima shenepach v'nischalef b'zman ha'koidim b'mosayim shana. More than changes that happened earlier in 2 centuries. V'kara b'kama makaymais, and what happened in many cities, k'may shekara l'dasan v'la'aviram, like happened to Dasan v'aviram. Dasan and Aviram were swallowed up by the earth. They and their families and their possessions disappeared. Dr. Ran, this happened to Loyalenu, to many Jewish communities. Shekama Noshim, many people, Haim v'chol asher lohem, Tamu, Nichrisu, asher nachalosam ne'ebchalo yaveim. They've disappeared, they cut away, and everything they own now belongs to their enemies. Achmana, let's learn. The Ran describes living through this type of experience for 13 years. As a leader of Klal Yisrael, as a leader of Am Yisrael, suddenly we realize that his life as Gadol Hador was not as royal, not as majestic as a person would think. So what does the Ran write about his experiences? What's his drasha for living through such a time? So let me describe to you the words of the Ran immediately around the section I just quoted, although it's a much longer arichus. But it's such a powerful lesson. Remembering the Ran's accomplishments were positive, extraordinary, remarkable, almost impossible. He set the Jewish people on their feet, him and his Talmidim after him, and he dealt with such awful times. Dr. Ran. The pasuk says Hashem will take away from you all illness, chayli, v'chol madvei, and all the woes, all the difficulties of Mitzrayim. What is chayli and what is madvei Mitzrayim? Dr. Ran, chayli, the natural diseases. What is madvei Mitzrayim? Things that are not natural, like happened in Mitzrayim, the makas of Mitzrayim. Says the Ran, Michlal Lav Atashemeyahen. Now we read this pasuk that all these difficulties are taken away from the Jewish people when we behave appropriately. But the Chayli and the Madvei Mitzrayim Le'aleinu come when we don't behave correctly. And listen to how he explains this philosophically. You have to stop and think and swallow what he's saying. But this is Shitas Haran, B'shas Magefa, B'shas Tzara, B'shas Machla. Dr. Ran, what is the purpose of punishment in Olam Hazeh in general? What is the purpose? And as you know, many Balei Machshava discusses. I'm going to talk about the Ran. What is the purpose in general in a person's private life where a person is challenged with punishments? Says the Ran, many understand it's miruk avaynais, to bring forgiveness for aveiros, forgiveness for sin. Says the Ran, he doesn't agree with that. If it's to bring forgiveness to sin, it's enough that those punishments should be in Gehenna, in Olam Haba. Why bring it in this world? The Ran says that there are those who answer, and there are great Rishonim who do answer, that a punishment in Olam Haba is far worse. Better to be punished in Olam Hazeh than in Olam Haba. The Ran himself dismisses that. He says, "Mishpat le'lekimhu." God does mishpat. If 1 minute of punishment in Olam Haba is like 7 years of punishment in Olam Hazeh, so let HaKadosh Baruch Hu do it that way. Let him give an equivalent in Olam Haba. Zukt around. You don't have a bardas, any intelligent person who's given a choice. Be punished now or later. You have to pay for your Aveira. You have to suffer now or later. Any intelligent person pushes off Yisurim till later. Why punish in this world? I'm not looking to explain all the Shittas HaRishayim today, just to explain the Shittas HaRan. The Ran says the following. Ein lecha loimer ela k'moshe pirashti. There's no explanation, says the Ran, except this which I'm talking about in this drasha. And that is that the humbling effect of a challenge, lo yoleinu, to a person's health, to a person's well-being, can be for the person to take the eternal struggle within him, the struggle between the seichel, the intelligence which wants to do good, and the taiva, what he calls the dimyainais, the imagination that's looking to do things that are not so good. He says when a person is in pain, he has the ability, not everyone does this, lahagbir es ha-seichel al ha-dimyainais. His intelligence should carry over his imagination. A person gets annoyed and angry at someone and wants to lash out. Intelligently, he knows it's the wrong thing to do. However, his dimyainais, his imagination, his desire has him lash out. When a person is hurting, it's easier to let the seichel win. A person who has a stomach ache and is sitting in the bathroom is ready to forswear overeating or eating fatty foods. When he's in pain, his brains are carrying the day. Doesn't last too long. When he feels well, everything changes. Saktaran, the purpose of these challenges is that during these moments, our seichel, our intelligence, should win, should be stronger. The clearest view of the world is loy oleinu, but the clearest view of a world is from a hospital bed. Life is a battle between the seichel, the intelligence, and the silliness and pettiness of our lives during good times. During difficulty, the seichel could win. It doesn't happen by itself. You have to make it happen. During times of challenge, everybody understands that during times of disease, like Elena, we hear of someone who's ill, we say, there, but for the good grace of God, go I, Hashem Yishmar. We know intelligently that it's not up to us. And we have fleeting moments of opportunity. Fleeting moments, a month or 2 months, even a year in the history of the world is a fleeting moment. During these fleeting moments, we have opportunity for our Ehrlichkeit, for our Yiddishkeit to shine through. What does it require? It requires a life that's based on a seichel, on an intelligence and understanding that we're not here because there was a big bang. We're here because the Creator put us here for a good reason. You'll note, I'm certain, that during times of difficulty, the Prime Minister of Israel will suddenly talk about God. You'll notice, certainly, that the President will, although in the United States, they talk about God quite often. The idea of the seichel over the dimyainais. Suddenly, during times of difficulty, there are no baseball games, or football games, or basketball games. You know, I've told people that after 9/11, they canceled sports. Why did they cancel sports? There was no disease, there was no Megaffa. Why did they cancel sports? Sports seems so silly, so petty, so foolish. It was canceled for a couple of weeks, you believe it? wasn't because you can't have crowds. It's because it was so absurd, so silly. What happened later? Well, the silliness came back. The pettiness came back. Rabbeinu Shalom. Zokt around. Haseichel Iskaber al hademyanos. That's the job during times of challenge, in times of difficulty for an individual or for a tzibur, one or the other. We began by talking about the behavior of Shimshon, Yaakov Avinu, of Boaz, of Jews throughout the generations, to talk about Hashem by His name. Until today, people say, "How are you?" I said, "Thank God." Am I thinking of God? No. Today, we're in the middle of a coronavirus, and people say, "How are you?" I say, "Thank God, I'm thinking of God." For once, I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I'm well. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to guard me, my family, all of us. I say, thank you, Hashem. I mean, thank you, Hashem. I'm thinking of Him. Haseichel mizgaber al hademyanos. Shem Shamayim Shogor B'Piv was always a praiseworthy description of people who are very great. Haseichel Yizgaber. I'm going to say a word to those who've had weddings during this period of time, or bar mitzvahs, without the usual simcha. Very sad for a chassan and kala who planned a wedding, as weddings go, with dancing, photographs, a lavish feast, a wonderful time. And now, because of the virus in the world, they have sometimes a minyan in the backyard. No eifruf, no sheva brachas. Bar mitzvah bachrim who are putting on tefillin for the first time, they count for minyan. There's no minyan for them to count for. To you, I want to say something. Chazal tell us, and Rashi brings in a chumash, Luchais Rishainos Shenitnu Bepumbi. The first Luchais were given with an extraordinarily loud presentation. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave the first Luchais with all of Klal Yisrael around the mountain. Ba'odun Kosher Alahar, there were kailais, there were sounds that could be seen, lightning, thunder, a mixture of darkness and light. Incredible. Luchais Rishainos, this was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gathering. Sheninu B'Pumbi was done loud. Shalta Bohem Yetzer Hara. Shalta Ben Ayin Hara. The Ayin Hara was Shelik. They didn't last more than 40 days. Luchais Shniyos were different. Later, when the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the second group of Luchais, the second pair of Luchais, which Moshe Rabbeinu brought up to the mountain on Rosh Chodesh Elul, came down on Yom Kippur, they were given B'tzina. Those Luchais are forever. Still sitting in the Aron, hidden away, waiting for Mashiach. Luchais Rishainos B'Pumbi Ayin Hara. Luchais Shniyos B'Tzina Ayin Tov. Who knows if our generation's Magefa of problems with Shalom Bayis, exploding rates of divorce, people unable to get along, who knows if it's not tied to Chasanis Shenitnu Bepumbi. How could it be different? Chasanis, we need to be advised to bring done quietly, done with a minyan. These are very special simchas. These are simchas that have a very special bracha. The simchas with his gabrus haseichel al hadimyonos, the dimyonos of weddings, the imagination people have in weddings. I once had an occasion to be Mesadik Kedushin for a young man from Ar Sameach. Got engaged to a young lady who was also a Balas Tshuva. Her parents called me and said they were never at an Orthodox wedding, and they'd like me to explain what it's like. Busy, I'm the Mesader Kedushin there, but as soon as the chuppah is finished, I'll sit down with you and describe what took place. And come, get dressed up, everyone will think you're an invited guest. And they did that. Boy, did I make a mistake. It was a fancy, schmancy wedding. About as fancy as they get. Part of the shmog was an ice sculpture, not just an ordinary ice sculpture. The sculpture was suspended from the ceiling and dripping as the ice melted, and it dripped into a little farm scene underneath. The water dripped and started to form a lake. I guess as soon as it was a marble, it was time to go to the chuppah. The first thing they asked me, I sat down with them after the chuppah, what is the meaning of the ice sculpture? They were sure it had something to do with Yiddishkeit. Rahman al-Islam. Rahman al-Islam. Luchais Rishayna Shenitnu Bapumbi. You're fortunate. You're not fortunate because it's a time of tsar and sorrow. I wish our seichel could be misgaber without it. But if you've had a wedding or a bar mitzvah, with the tzina, with the privacy of the things that are taking place now, all of the brachas of Hatznei Lachesim Hashem should be chal on you. How wonderful it would be if we could look back and say, wow, those who got married this way, look, they were zeichet to beautiful homes, to extraordinary families, to lives in which they served Hashem with great joy. If only we could see it with our eyes and understand it with our seichel, maybe we could change moving forward. Maybe. There are a lot of predictions about what the future holds for us as we stand here today, Rosh Chodesh Nissim, Tovshin Pei. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. The predictions are all over the place. When will it start? When will it end? When will it stop here or there? Predictions change from one day to the next. Only God knows. The time will come and it'll pass. People are saying the world will never be the same. That's a prediction. I can make only one prediction. I don't know when it'll end. I don't know how it will end. I don't know, Rahman al-Islam, how many karbanis HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, not in health and not in parnasa. I don't know. I know one thing. When it ends, everything will go back to the way it was before. The silliness, the pettiness, it'll all go back to the way it was. Nothing will have changed, except for those small items of change to which we can commit now and miyodei avostik. Kuli hai v'ulai. Hiskabrus haseichel al hadimyain. It's a tremendous challenge. It doesn't happen easily. The Ran was a manik of Klal Yisrael who left an imprint that's l'dorei doros until Mashiach comes and beyond. The Ran lived during difficult times. I would say he was great despite that, but it's not accurate. He was great because of it. Somebody who goes through trying times either rises or falls. He either sees it as a moment to stand up and pick yourself up and do what you need to do. Or else the person falls, you don't stay the same. This is an opportunity. It'll end. What happens if it ends tomorrow? You'll have squandered God's opportunity. You have wasted all the sacrifice that takes place. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us all shmirah. But we should have the brains, the seichel to understand that when we're challenged, it's a moment of opportunity. It's a moment of great opportunity. Grab it. Grab onto it tightly. Take a piece of seichel, a piece of intelligence, something your brain tells you need to do. Now grab onto it. Not 100 things. The Yitzhara wants you to do 100 things. No. Something meaningful. Grab onto it. Because this is going to pass. It'll pass soon. And the world will go back to the way it was. And a year from now, people will be jockeying for fancy weddings. And people push weddings off for months because of Sfira, because they can't do it beforehand in a nice enough hall. That's what happens. The wedding is pushed off for months because the hall is, not to our standards. Well, this year, there's no hall. Next year, most people will go back to the way it was. I hope you will not. Kadosh Baruch Hu should help. We should all be able to gather at the background of the Navi Shir that you're accustomed to, Be'ezus Hashem, once again, in Achiezer. May Kadosh Baruch Hu bring refuahs to all those who need refuahs, nechama to so many who need nechama, and Yeshuas to all of Klal Yisrael all over the world. I put the vach to everybody.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.